Welcome to Shechem.
Yeah.
All right, scratch that. Welcome to Shechem. And this is one of the most mentioned cities in your Bibles. Okay, so let's talk about this wall first of all. I don't think we've stood in front of a Middle Bronze wall yet, have we?
Wow.
And what we want to learn about looking at this wall is we want to learn about Jericho, where we're going to be in a few days. Okay, so at about the time of Abraham, there was a military invention, a weaponry invention with a battering ram. They used to make their walls of cities differently, but then they invented the battering ram. They came and knocked the wall down and killed everybody inside. So they had to start fortifying their cities differently. And what they did is they actually made their cities smaller and higher. So imagine the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. They did something like a Temple Mount and built their cities on top of it. So what they did is they put these stone retaining walls that you see in here. Look at that massive stone wall. And they put it all the way around the entire city. And then on top of it was a mud brick wall. So this went up 25 feet of stone wall, and then on top of it another 25 feet of mud brick wall. And this is what the spies that Moses sent out came back and said, oh, their cities are so well fortified. This is what they're talking about. And they filled the inside of that retaining wall, the inside of the city, up like a snow cone. With the mud brick wall, what's going to happen if you come and start banging on that thing with the whole city behind it with your battering ram? You're going to get a broken battering ram and nothing else. So at that point, then the strategy for these ones laying cities under siege was to build siege ramps up to the mud brick wall to get the war machines up there, the battering ram up there to knock down the mud brick wall. Okay, now when a city is excavated, then there's usually a remnant of the mud brick wall that's usually preserved to a certain height. But when you don't protect it, then over the years, then it just melts away and disappears. The only thing that's left from the mud brick wall is that little blob on top of the gate on this side, and then an even smaller blob over on the other side. That's all that's left from the excavations, and that also is going to disappear. So that's how you typically find the mud brick wall on a city when you excavate, but not at Jericho. At Jericho, it wasn't up there. You don't see that kind of blob up there, even at the excavations. It would fallen to the outside of the city and collapse to the outside of the city, which we'll cover, of course, at Jericho. So that's why these fortification walls are so massive, because we're in the flat area. Later we'll be at Samaria, which is a city built on top of a natural hill, which was easier to protect because of that. So welcome to Shechem. You're passing through the gate, one of the gates, into the city, right through Shechem. As they should be, to not allow groups to do that. And we don't want to be destructive or anything like that, but there's if you want to take a souvenir and pick a piece of pottery up off the ground, then you can. Yeah. Okay. All right. Here we are. Let me just orient us. There's the church that we were just at with the red roof, Greek Orthodox Church, Jacob's Well. This is Mount Gerizim, the Mount of Blessing, and we'll be going through that. This is Mount Ebal, the Mount of Curses. And there, the Bible says that Joshua built an altar on Mount Ebal, the Mount of Curses, And when I first got here, I was told that because there was a altar that was found and excavated on Mount Ebal, and the excavator, an Israeli excavator, said that it was dated to the time of Joshua. But when I got here, I was taught definitely no. It's way later than that. It's not an altar. And over the years, I learned what that means. Translated is Joshua built. That is the altar that Joshua built. Okay, so that's up there. We can't go there because it's a military zone, that whole mountain. And so you have to be escorted by the military if you go up there.
So where exactly is it?
I don't know. I've never been there because of that. I've gone through the excavation reports though, and it's amazing altar up there.
I've seen pictures.
Okay, so with all that in mind, let's go to Genesis chapter 12. At the beginning of our Bibles, not the very beginning, but pretty darn close. Oh, let me get my glasses on. It's hard to wear a mic and glasses at the same time. Okay, verse 6. So Genesis chapter 12, verse 6. Abram. Notice his name isn't even Abraham yet. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Yahweh appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to Yahweh who had appeared to him. Okay, this is the first time that Abram is mentioned in the land. Now, if you will remember, we were driving down the Jordan Valley. You see, Jordan is the furthest ridge away. And we were driving down there and we went by Wadi Farah, the Valley of Farah, and remember I pointed it out, and so I said this is where Abraham crossed over, and he went up Wadi Farah, which is on the other side of that mountain, and through a gap that's over here and up to this place. It's 12 kilometers from here down to the Jordan River. Okay, so this is the very first place Abram is in the land. This is the very first place in the land that God called him to, that God appeared to him. And this is the very first time in the land that God gives him the promise, your offspring will inherit this land. Okay, now let's go over to chapter 33. Chapter 33, verse 18. Says, after Jacob came from Padan Aram, right? So that's out that way. It's the same place that Abraham originally came from, Haran. He arrived safely at the city of Shechem. So when he comes back from Haran, Padan Aram, then the first place he's mentioned in the land also is Shechem in Canaan, and camped within sight of the city. Jacob camped within sight of the city almost 4,000 years ago. There's no way we can know almost 4,000 years later where Jacob camped, right? Oh, yes, we can.
All right.
Where did Jacob camp?
Inside of the city.
What?
Inside of the city.
Not inside the
No,
cities,
inside.
within sight of the city. Where did he camp? Where did Jacob camp?
Well.
Right there.
Oh, absolutely.
One thing that shepherds leave behind from ancient times is wells, especially when they dig 120-foot wells. Would Jacob dig a 120-foot well there and then camp over there?
No, sir.
No. He would camp where he dug the 120-foot well. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Almost 4,000 years later, and we know where Jacob camped. Okay. Camped within sight of the city, verse 19. For 100 pieces of silver, he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. There he set up an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. Okay, so Jacob also built an altar here. Then we have chapter 34, and this is the story of Dinah. We remember the story of Dinah. She was raped here. I'm not going to read it all, but she was raped here. And then two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, are the ones who led the revenge plot against the men of Shechem. Shechem, the son of Hamor, wanted to marry Dinah, and so they made a deal with them: if you get circumcised, if all the men of the city get circumcised, then we'll intermarry with you. They all got circumcised, and when they were the sorest, then they were attacked. The men were killed, and then that starts this relationship with Shechem and the Israelites, so that later when Joshua and the Israelites come in and they're attacking all these cities, Jericho and Hatzor and all these cities are being attacked, Lachish, they don't fight. There's no battle mentioned here at Shechem. In fact, this is where they renew the covenant. Okay, so in fact, let's go to the last chapter of Joshua, Joshua chapter 24. And Joshua chapter 24 is the renewal of the covenant. But let's just go through. Let's go through this. This is in Deuteronomy chapters 27, 28, and 29. But this is on the other side. So on the other side of the river, at a site called Abel Shittim, this is the plan that Moses is giving them of what they are to do when they come here. And so it's what they end up doing. So this is what they do. They divide the 12 tribes in half. So 6 tribes are standing on Mount Gerizim. So cover that mountain with 6 tribes of Israel. Okay? And they are shouting this way all the blessings that the Israelites will receive if they keep the covenant that they're renewing. On this side, the other 6 tribes. So cover that entire mountain with Israelites. And by the way, just look at these 2 mountains. Do you see that there's a natural amphitheater right here?
Right.
And so the early pilgrims talk about the acoustics here, which you can't really appreciate now because there's a city in here and all the city noise. But this is like an amplifier. So this side, all the blessings that the Israelites will receive if they keep the covenant with Yahweh, and from this direction, all the curses that they will receive if they break the covenant with Yahweh. Now, what do they end up doing? Keeping or breaking? Which is why the altar that Joshua was told to build is not on the Mount of Blessings. It's on the Mount Ebal, the Mount of Curses, right? And it's represented. Where are we represented by nature? The Mount of Curses. Could we keep a covenant with God if He made a covenant with us? No chance.
Only through Jesus.
So God came down and died as a sacrifice on the Mount of Curses in this world that is cursed. Us who are cursed, He became the curse for us so that we could receive grace, which means we get this Mount of Blessings even though we don't deserve it.
Yes, amen.
Okay, so let's read some of this. If I can get my glasses on.
One of them specs you just put up there like in England.
Okay, chapter 24 of Joshua. Then Joshua assembled, verse 1, Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. Skipping to verse 14. Now fear Yahweh and serve Him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your forefathers worshipped beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve Yahweh. But if serving Yahweh seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your forefathers served beyond the river or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve Yahweh. So he's got him here. He's renewing the covenant. Choose who you're gonna serve. Are you gonna serve Yahweh? Or are you gonna serve Moloch, the king of the gods of the Canaanites that now you live in their land? Or are you gonna serve the gods beyond the river, or the gods that you were introduced to in Egypt? Choose who you're gonna serve. Verse 18, and Yahweh drove out before all the nations, including the Amorites who lived in the land, down to verse 21. But the people said to Joshua, no, we will serve Yahweh. Then Joshua said, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen to serve Yahweh. Yes, we are witnesses, they replied. Now then said Joshua, throw away the foreign gods that are among you, and yield your hearts to Yahweh, the God of Israel. And the people said to Joshua, we will serve Yahweh our God and obey him. On that day, Joshua made a covenant for the people. And there at Shechem, he drew up for them decrees and laws. And Joshua recorded these things in the book of the law of God. Now listen to this. Then he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak near the holy place of Yahweh. He sets up a large stone near the holy place of Yahweh. Anywhere around here that might serve, you see a big stone anywhere?
Yeah.
See a big stone that might be the holy place, one thing on top of another.
Yeah.
That would be here for Shechem. Anybody see that? Oh, over there. We'll go over there in a moment, but you see that stone that's been put back up in front of this building. This is a stone that actually was twice as preserved as it is when it was found, but the way you get stones out in an excavation when you're down, then you break it up with a sledgehammer and you take it out piece. And so the archaeologist here, a guy named Ernest Wright, didn't realize they were breaking that up until they destroyed a third of it. So there was a third already missing, and then they destroyed a third, and that's only a third of it left. So put 2/3 of that stone back up there, the pillar or the stone that stands up. I believe that stone is the stone that we're reading about right here, and I'll explain why when we get over there. But let's go on to verse 27. It says this. Joshua says this. See, he said to all the people, this stone will be a witness against us. It has heard all the words Yahweh has said to us. It will be a witness against you if you are untrue to your God. None of us were there in 1400 BC, right around there when this occurred, but that stone was.
Yeah.
And that stone heard it all and is the witness of the renewal of the covenant. I tried to speak to it, but it doesn't speak English. Okay, and then verse 32 says, and Joseph's bones, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem. Okay, and the tomb of Joseph is right over the top of these houses there. It's just a stone's throw away. I've taken groups there before, but it's been blown up, rebuilt, blown up, rebuilt, and now blown up again, and it's been closed for a couple of years now. There's not much to see because it's never been able to be excavated, because it's a shared site between Jews and Muslims, like the one we were at yesterday. Now, while we're up here and we can see, I need to explain a few other things. Let's talk again about where we just were. Let's get some context of that. So there's the well. And I want you to go and you see this minaret that's sticking up in the sky over here. That's Sikkar. Okay, and part of it has been excavated. There's ruins that are up there. Sikkar is not mentioned in the Old Testament, most likely because it didn't exist in the Old Testament. So I've been talking about this Hasmonean period, right? When the Jews rebelled against Antiochus Epiphanes IV, and they won their independence, and they had control of Jerusalem, and then they started conquering the land back again. And so they conquered the Samaritans. A guy named John Hyrcanus conquered this area. And so he destroyed the city and he destroyed the Samaritans' temple. If you look up on Mount Gerizim and you go to the left, you'll see a building, a little building sticking up there. You see that?
Yeah.
That is a mosque, an old mosque, abandoned mosque, that's sitting on top of a Byzantine church, that's sitting on top of a Samaritan temple. One thing on top of another. The Samaritan temple was built by Sanballat. Remember him? And he's the one that's given Nehemiah such a hard time. And we know that when they were not allowed to participate in the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, Sanballat built a temple up here. How do we know that? Because it was excavated up on top of that mountain, the remains of it. And that's what it dates to. Okay, so now this is important. When Jesus and the Samaritan woman are sitting at that well down there, Shechem and the Samaritan temple are already in ruins. Okay, so why in that story does it come out that the Jews and the Samaritans don't get along? Well, who destroyed the main city for the Samaritans, Shechem, and who destroyed their temple? The Jews. So who the Babylonians and Romans are to the Jews, destroying Jerusalem and the temple, the Jews are to the Samaritans. Okay, so they don't get along. Now, when you destroy a city, you can destroy it, or you can really put a lot of work and effort into it so that you destroy it in such a way that it will never be rebuilt. That's how John Hyrcanus destroyed Shechem. It never was lived in again. And so this Sychar probably was a satellite town that came up because of this destruction. When this city was destroyed by John Hyrcanus, the water source was from springs that come out of the base of Mount Gerizim, and they were brought by aqueduct. Remember, the aqueduct comes along in the Hellenistic period. They were brought by aqueduct here to Shechem, and John Hyrcanus, he destroyed the aqueducts so thoroughly they never were rebuilt, and this city was never, in other words, he destroyed the water source for this city when he destroyed the water, which means that this poor Samaritan woman has to walk all the way from where you see that minaret sticking up over there, all the way down to the well, at least once a day, if not more than once a day, to get water from the well, and then all the way back. And Jesus, being the Messiah, knows exactly what to speak to her about. And not only that, but as a Jew, what to speak to her about. He speaks to her about water, which of course she thinks it's about physical water, but it's about the living water. It's about him. And so you have all this context here to that story. She says, well, our forefathers say it's this mountain that we should worship on, right? And already at that time, the temple is in ruins up there. But you Jews say that it's Jerusalem, it's Mount Moriah that we should worship on. The second temple is still standing down in Jerusalem, but not for much longer. And Jesus tells her, it's not about this mountain, it's not about that mountain, it's about me. And so then we see the gospel come to the Samaritan people because she believes, she tells others. He spends some time here, Jesus does, and other Samaritans come to believe. The Samaritans are still around. They live on top of Mount Gerizim to this day, and we're going to go up there and spot us some Samaritans later today. Okay, so now we're going to walk over and look at that building. But before we do, quick story. So this mount, look up on Mount Gerizim, and you see the radio towers up there, and you see a gray tower sticking up there. That's an Israeli military tower. They're watching us right now with binoculars. Okay? And then over here, right off the edge of the tell, is a Palestinian military base and police station. My son and I come early one morning, and we park right there with a drone that's this big. It's black. It looks like an alien up in the sky. We come right out here, being watched by the Israeli military, and then with the Palestinians right over here. We're terrified, as we always were when we were flying. And my son always says something like, "Dad, I don't think this is a good idea." And I always say something like, "Son, sometimes you just got to do what you got to do." So up we go, and I saw on your iPad you got these pictures. If you want to see the pictures we shot here, you can look at them on Tim's iPod. So up we go, and we're taking pictures, and oh man, it's scary, and our battery only lasts for 8 minutes. So then we come down, we grab our drone, we run, we throw it in the car, and we take off. And as we take off in the car, Palestinian police car comes and comes right in front of us, so that I have to stop. One of the police officers comes and gets in the passenger seat. My son is flying this drone because I got to work the camera, and he's better at flying it than me. But he's not old enough to sit in the front seat. So he comes and sits in the front seat. They take us over to the military place over there in the police station, and they're talking to each other. And basically they're saying, look, this is just a man and his son. I mean, they're not the ones that were flying that big drone and everything. So they escort us out of town, and they give us our passports. And let us go. And so we're driving back to Jerusalem, and I say, son, when we get home, if you wouldn't mind allowing me to explain this to your mother, that would be good. And of course that didn't work. He walked through the door, and we were arrested in Nablus.
Is it against the law to have a drone in Israel?
I have no idea, but.
And you kept the drone? They didn't take your drone?
No, they didn't know that. They didn't think it was us.
You had it in the drone?
Jerusalem, from the Galilee area, the Jews, is they came on the other side, the east side of the river, all the way down from Galilee, all the way down to Bethany beyond the Jordan, across from Jericho, and then they crossed the Jordan there, and then up into Jerusalem. But they avoided this place because of the Samaritans and the bad relation. But this time, Jesus chose to come this way because, of course, he knew that the Samaritans needed to know who he was.
I heard they avoided this place also because they didn't want to become unclean.
Oh, damn.
The city went. It went past where we were standing.
So yeah, the city went on past where we were standing. Yeah, it goes quite a ways. I used to do an archaeological test here of what this building is, but then they put this sign up that says Fortune Temple. So it kind of ruined my analogy.
Oh, wow.
Come on in. Yeah, I need that. Okay, come in and start looking this building over, because I need to now present to you what I think the evidence is that stone is the one that is talked about in the Joshua account. If you look around at this building, what does it look like to you?
Synagogue.
It's divided in half. Look, this is one room that you're in over here, and this is another room back here. And then it's got a big stone that's standing in front of it. What do you think the function of this building is? a temple. Now that sign gave it away. It says fortress temple. But really what makes it a temple is, first of all, it's got this giant stone in front of it, which is a standing stone, a sacred stone. Now I want you to look at this. So this is the inside of the wall of the building. Do you see that? Right here? It goes all the way from here, all the way to here.
Wow.
That is
Huge.
huge. That's like a city wall. What is a wall this big doing on a building? Well, the idea in archaeology and architecture is the wider the wall, the taller the building. Okay, so this is the reconstruction of this building by the archaeologist Ernest Wright. He's got it at 4 stories, could be more. So if you haven't seen this, I'm going to give it back to Rachel, and you can look at it. So this was a fortress temple, or in mine, a stronghold, or tower, it calls it. But here's the thing. The Bible says that at Shechem there was a fortress temple, and scholars did not know what a fortress temple was until they dug at Shechem and found this fortress temple. Okay, so now we're going to read. Now if we didn't have the biblical account, okay, so it's a temple, we could say, we'd probably guess that it was some kind of a Canaanite temple, wouldn't we, or something like that, but we wouldn't really know. We wouldn't know anything about it. We wouldn't know any events that happened here, but since we have the Bible, now we can read the Bible, and the Bible will interpret this archaeology that you're seeing. It's what brings these rocks alive and makes them meaningful. If we didn't have this, they really wouldn't be that meaningful. Archaeology would just be boring.
Lose its soul.
It would lose its soul, exactly, which is why I called my book The Soul of Archaeology. Okay, so Judges chapter 9. The story of Abimelech. And remember, Abimelech is one of the sons of Gideon, and we passed Ophrah, where Gideon is from, and where he killed his 70 brothers. Chapter 9, verse 4. They gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal-Berith. So we know the name of the god worshipped here, and we know the name of the temple. The temple of, it's not the name of the temple, it's the name of the god, but it is the name of the temple too. But Baal means Lord. Guess what Berith means? Covenant. Lord of the Covenant is the name of this temple and the name of the God that is being worshipped here. Okay? That's why I believe that stone, which represents this God, the Lord of the Covenant, is the same stone that Joshua is talking about, who is a witness to the renewal of the covenant that is still in the Judges period, called the Lord of the Covenant. You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That's the honorary sacred stone that in the belief at that time would represent the God that's being worshipped here. Okay, verse 6, it says, Then all the citizens of Shechem and Beth Milo gathered beside the great tree at the pillar in Shechem to crown Abimelech king. So where did they gather to make Abimelech king? It's at the pillar, or I could say it could be translated at the standing stone in Shechem to crown him king. Where is it?
Right there.
Right there. Okay, and they crowned him king. Is Abimelech the first king of Israel? Who's the first king of Israel? Okay, so they made him king, but Scripture itself does not honor him as king. In other words, it's just something the people illegitimately did. It's not what God himself was doing. Okay, now skip over to verse 46. reason that they made him king is because the wife of Gideon, that Abimelech's mother, is from Shechem. And then they had a falling out with each other. It says in verse 46, on hearing this, the citizens in the tower of Shechem, or in the fortress temple of Shechem, went into the stronghold of the temple, the fortress temple. And here it is, the name again, of El Barit. What does El mean?
Lord.
It means God, right? Barit, God of the covenant. Okay, now here is something that should totally confuse you. You ready? You are not standing in a Canaanite temple. You are standing in an Israelite temple.
Wow.
Just fell away from
You get it?
Yeah.
Now, is the first temple of Israel here at Shechem? No. So scripture, again, just like it doesn't legitimize Abimelech as the first king of Israel, nor does it honor this as the first temple of Israel. Again, it's something that the people are doing. The Bible doesn't say specifically what this is all about, but here is my interpretation of it. You take it or leave it. It might be right, it might be wrong, but this is how I understand it. We have all these examples in the Bible. Think of Gideon's ephod, right? That is later worshipped, right? Think of the bronze serpent of Moses. What do the people do with the bronze serpent of Moses later? So what I think happened is Joshua set that stone up as a witness to the renewal of the covenant. And then later, now in the Judges period, the people are worshiping it as a god and setting up this temple to worship it as a god. Okay?
Makes sense.
Okay, verse 47, when Abimelech heard that they had assembled there, he and all his men, this is how you destroy a temple, he and all his men went up Mount Zalmon, probably an early name for one of these mountains. He took an axe and cut off some branches, which he lifted to his shoulders. He ordered the men with him, quick, do what you have seen me do. So all the men cut branches and followed Abimelech. They piled them against the stronghold and set it on fire over the people inside. So all the people in the tower of Shechem, about 1,000 men and women, also died. Okay, so that's how you burn down a mostly stone and mud brick building. That's how the Romans burned down the temple in Jerusalem. They brought in wood. That's how they burned down Jericho. They brought in wood and they burned it. Okay, so the Abimelech story. Now let's go to 1 Kings. 1 Kings.
You're moving on. Can I ask, were the doors probably wood and they burned?
Yes, doors would have been massive and made of wood.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's go 1 Kings, what did I say, 12?
12, 1 to 24.
12. Okay, so verse 1, Rehoboam, Solomon's son, went to Shechem, for all the Israelites had gone there to make him king. Isn't that interesting? Rehoboam, the heir of Solomon, comes here, the same place where they made Abimelech the illegitimate king. He comes here to be made king. Verse 3 says, so they sent for Jeroboam, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, now listen to this, your father, so these are the 10 tribes. This is the northern kingdom we're in now up here. We're in Ephraim. And so this is what the 10 tribes say to Rehoboam. Your father, Solomon, put a heavy yoke on us. So what don't they like? Heavy yoke. But now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. They want a light yoke. They've had a heavy yoke put on them. Verse 12. So he goes, and for 3 days he goes and thinks about it, and then they say come back after 3 days. He goes and talks to the young men about it, the old men about it. Who does he listen to? The old men advice or the young men?
Young man.
The young men. Verse 12. 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam, as the king had said, come back to me in 3 days. The king answered the people harshly, rejecting the advice given him by the elders. He followed the advice of the young men and listened to what he said, and said, my father made your yoke heavy. Listen to what he says. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. What's the response in verse 16? When all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, what share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, O Israel. Look after your own house, O David. So the Israelites went home, but as for the Israelites who were living in the towns of Judah, Rehoboam still ruled over them. Okay, now listen, the divided kingdom, it happens here, right there in that story.
Right.
Now from this point on, the northern kingdom separates. The first king of the northern kingdom is Jeroboam. His capital, you're sitting in it, is Shechem. Okay, the southern kingdom of Judah, Rehoboam continues to rule there. If I could pick one, well, let me finish this. Matthew 11. Matthew 11. Okay, quick review. What did the people here say to Rehoboam? Your father put a heavy yoke on us. If you lighten our yoke, we'll serve you. He said, yes, my father put a heavy yoke on you. I'm going to make it heavier. Kingdom divides. Matthew 11:28. Come to me, Jesus says, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light.
Amen. Amen.
The one who caused the divided kingdom with the heavy yoke is then reversed. The one who unites people together is the king who came with a light yoke.
Amen. Amen.
Okay, if I could choose one word, for Shechem, it would be covenant. Covenant. It's the first place that Abram appears in the land. It's the first place in the land that God called him out to, that God appears to him and says, to your offspring I give this land. Covenant. It's the place where Jacob comes and builds an altar, continuing on in that covenant. It's the place where Simeon and Levi make a covenant with the men of Shechem that they'll intermarry if they get circumcised, and then they kill them. It's the place where when they finally come, Joshua and the Israelites, after 40 years of wandering, when they come into the land, Moses said, come here and renew the covenant, and they come here and renew the covenant. Being shouted from this way the blessings, being shouted from this way the curses. This is where Abimelech was crowned the illegitimate king. That's where, and the stone that Joshua put up as a witness to the covenant then becomes an object of stumbling as they worship it as a god, the Lord of the covenant, the God of the covenant. In this temple, which is burned down, and archaeologically, when it was excavated, all those floors collapsed on top of each other in a burn destruction dating to the time of the judges. And then the covenant of a heavy yoke or a light yoke with Rehoboam here causes the divided kingdom. And then Jesus coming here to the well as the Messiah, the one who makes the covenant of salvation with the world and the forgiveness of sins. This is a place of covenant.
Yeah.
Think of all that we just covered, from Abraham to Jesus, and nobody comes here. Even some groups that come to Jacob's Well, you know, where is that Korean group or Asian group?
Yeah.
They didn't come here.
Is it they're afraid or they just don't know?
I think they just don't know. I don't know. I've been coming here for 12 years. I've never seen a group here,
Wow.
except for the group that I'm with, of course.
Your book will help get the word out.
Well, this is not in my book. It needs to be in volume 2.
Volume 2, yeah.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I guess we need to.
Yeah, we need to tell people.
Now, the capital of Israel changed 3 times. You can see also that this is a crossroad. There's a road going up through here to Galilee, and then this one cuts between the 2 mountains and goes down to the sea. Okay, so we're at a crossroad, and then the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel changes 3 times. At first it's at Shechem, then it goes through that gap over there to a site called Tirzah, and then it ends up down this gap down here where we're going next at Samaria. So this is the first capital of the northern kingdom, and Samaria is the last capital of the northern